everybody. Hey,
Hi.
look who I bumped into.
Welcome to Don Valley East.
Yeah, fancy meeting you here. Hi, my name is Karen Boite. I am a member of the Ontario Autism Coalition. I am a mother to a 9-year-old boy who is on the autism spectrum. I am a member of our board of directors. I am a member of our board. I am what I don't know. I'm the gal who's come over here to talk to you, Michael.
And I appreciate it. Welcome to Don Valley East, which is a beautiful community, and we've got a lot of parents that come in to see me. In fact, I have some parents coming in today to talk about this very issue. So I appreciate you being here.
Great. Well, we're happy to be here. We just push on with our Facebook Lives. We find that most people find us relatively quickly, Michael, and then a lot more people watch us in the evening after they've tucked their kids in. So let's just start. The Ontario Autism Coalition is a group of parents, autistic self-advocates, therapists, teachers, maybe some politicians here and there. Some have called us professional protesters. We've been called that.
You do protest well, though.
We do.
I don't know if you're professional protesters, but
yeah.
Very effective means. We've had protesters at this office here and at Queen's Park, and
and I was one of them.
It's just beautiful democracy, right? So I think it's a good thing.
So that's who we are. We speak truth to power. We prefer to speak directly to human beings who want to work with us and help develop supports for our children and people with special needs or disabilities, adult self-advocates, you name it.
Yeah.
We just want the world to be a better place.
Yeah.
Kumbaya.
I agree. And that's, my experience, if you can remember when I was given the file by the Premier to look for ways to find solutions.
Let me introduce you.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Let me tell some people, because some people may not know who you are. Here's Michael Coteau. Michael Coteau.
Coteau, yes.
Coteau. I'm sorry. Grade 13 French. It just, I just go there sometimes. Okay, Michael Coteau was the Minister of Children and Youth Services, and he oversaw the formation of what we now know to be the Ontario Autism Program. Have I got that right?
Correct.
Okay. This ministry has since changed, and it is now called MCCS, Children, Community and Social Services, and it is run by the Right Honorable Lisa MacLeod. Right? Is that how you say it?
Not the Right Honorable. That's restricted for Justin Trudeau. Just the Honorable.
The Honorable. So only the Prime Minister. So one day you will be, you hope perhaps, the Right Honorable.
And do you know why they call him the Right? Because he's on the right-hand side of the Speaker. Yeah, I think that's the reason why.
See?
The Right Honorable.
I learn something every day. So I asked Michael to sit down. He did allow me to call him Michael. To sit down with me to talk about recent history. I want you to teach me, please.
Yeah.
And some of our new parents who are entering, trying to figure out services for their children. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I heard you say once that you'd worked on the Pan Am Games in Toronto, but the autism file was the hardest job you've ever had.
Yeah. It was very, it was very challenging because this was an issue, a challenge that it was so complex, right? It was government upon government upon government and school boards and service providers and, all these different elements that for years and years and years were really they weren't working together, disjointed, lost. And on top of that, the number of children who were autistic was increasing. So, the pressure on the system to find solutions and, the demand, it all became very layered. And so peeling away those layers and working with so many different voices to find solutions was a very, very difficult thing. But, I have to thank a few people who kind of prepared me for this challenge and, people who taught me. And the advisors that I brought in to provide me with some guidance, because we don't know everything, right? We've got to find smart politicians find smart people.
Yeah.
And that's what I was able to do.
Can I ask you a little bit about your background?
Yeah.
So I know that you've had a lot of different jobs. in
Yes.
politics. And I noticed that early in your political career, you were a school trustee.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you work on special education issues or autism related issues when you were a trustee?
So yes, I did work on many issues. You know, being a school board trustee, just any type of special needs, special education's constantly at the forefront, and you're looking for ways to make improvements. But I had a lady come to see me when I was pretty new as a trustee, and I won't mention her name because confidentiality. But she came to see me about her son, who is autistic, and was going through transitions, wasn't getting the support, and she wasn't getting respect from the system. This was maybe 2007, around there.
Mm-hmm.
So
what do you mean by that?
people were dismissing her. She went in and
Yeah.
talked about issues about her child's challenges, maybe what the origins of that challenge were, how to use. She was talking about ABA, but before the school system even knew what it was. You could go into any setting and talk about ABA. No one knew what it was. So she would go in and talk to these experts in education about strategies to put in place, and she wasn't getting respect. So I spoke to her. She didn't have a vacation for a decade. Was constantly like, this was her life, right? And she was a single mother. So we worked together, and it was interesting when I got this file, in the autism file from the premier. I phoned that particular person and I said to her, I said, when you thought I was helping you back in 2007, with your son, what we didn't realize is that when you thought I was helping you, you were actually helping me prepare for the challenge that I have to take on today.
Yeah.
So we set up a demonstration class, an ABA demonstration class. I brought her to see the director of education, Chris Spence, at the time. Chris Spence was remarkable. He got in there, he figured it out. There were all these challenges with, unions, the schools, and he did it. He set up the first demonstration ABA class, and we got it going. And when he left, it was just shut down again. When Chris Spence was, we all know what happened with Chris Spence, the director of education. He left the school board, and everything just got shut down. And then I was an MPP at the time. So, that was my introduction. But I do have a cousin. I have a cousin in the GTA that is autistic, and I have two aunts on my mother's side. So, it's something that's always been kind of close to my family.
Yeah. I find that in parenting my son, I have to constantly shed expectations that I didn't even realize I had. So like when I was 5, I could walk to school by myself.
Right.
I could make a phone call my grandma, and tell her about my day, tell her all about my day, whether she wanted to hear it or not, right? And as a parent, you have to unlearn a lot of those automatic thoughts that enter your mind when you're raising your child who's developing very differently and has likely extremely different talents that you have. So once that happens, then it's kind of it makes a gal pretty introspective, right? Then you realize that your friends, your family have not gone through that transformation. They still have these automatic thoughts. And if they themselves are raising neurotypical children, it's very hard to explain to people what it means to totally change the way you think about child rearing, right?
Right.
And then you go to the school and you find out the walls really go up. And as you say, with that mother who taught you these great lessons, this is our life. We have to go into rooms and look at people with blank stares, or look at people who smile nicely at us, and don't give up, don't hear us,
Yeah.
And that makes us pretty ornery.
Yeah.
So what I want to ask you about is, when you served as a trustee, how did your colleagues react to parents lobbying for supports and extra staff for their children?
I always believe Yeah, I have a lot of admiration for school board trustees. You know, when I was first elected, the pay was $5,000. You know, I was around 29 years old.
Mhm.
I got there, and people like Jerry Gershon and Irene Atkinson, you know, Bruce Davis, people who were there, and you know, Kathleen Wynne came from that board, and Shelley Carroll and Paula
Mhm.
Fletcher,
Mhm.
like some real heavyweights when it comes to, like, you know, people fighting for equity. I always found that the school board, the trustees, were always the first in line for big change, and then municipal, provincial, federal governments follow. But I always thought that there was a will at the within the elected officials at the school board. Um, there was a sometimes disconnect between the bureaucrats, especially when you're talking about new things that are entering. You see more and more cases of young people coming in with special needs, or even the adoption of technology. Like, it's always a culture shift, right? Because you're talking about a system with 35,000 employees, you know, 5 or 6 different unions, 500 schools. It's a big entity.
Yeah.
So I always found that there was the political will, but it's just lining up the bureaucratic, the provincial, and all of those pieces together, which was always the challenge. So I think, in general, people want to make sure that children have the resources they need. I don't care what political party you're from, you know, what, you know, part of Ontario you're from, you know, if you're with this group or that group, people want to help children. And I think the biggest barrier that we have as people who want to help children is having adults, you know, first of all, looking at it from a child's perspective and a family's perspective, because sometimes they don't have the ability to do that.
Mhm.
You see in Ontario now where, you know, kids are being told they can't play, you know, street hockey, or, you know, kids are getting fined for selling lemonade. Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's hard being a kid,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But imagine
Yeah.
being a kid with special needs, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to adjust the way we think and stop making the system good for adults. And, you know, it's a perspective like we make it good for adults so they can help kids, but rather let's make the system good for kids and have adults help
Yeah.
children, right?
That's
So-
the trick for us, you know, because I agree with you. I think your average person wants every child to thrive,
Yeah,
you know, and they just don't know how.
right.
And I think too that one of the biggest issues we have is that people don't want to admit that they don't know how.
Right. Well, it's
And
I-
so the
you're
walls
absolutely
come
right.
up because people don't want to just, okay, let's all step back
You're
and
100% right.
really look at a situation. For us parents, it's hard to stay neutral. Obviously, we love our children. It's our passion, and we are pretty relentless, you know. But
Yeah.
but at the same time, the experience of being a parent in dealing with someone where the walls go up is that we're gaslit a lot,
Right.
you know. So it's the person sitting in front of you is like, wow, I don't really know what to do for your child, so let me make it your problem, mom. Let me turn it around and tell you that you need to do this at home, and you obviously are not disciplining your child well, and all that sort of stuff. And we start to go crazy. We really do.
Right. Can I
yeah.
say something?
Yeah.
Please. You're 100% right, and I find this happening in other areas when it comes to children. You know, when we're talking about, you know, race, for example, people feel uncomfortable to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a, you know, middle-aged white male who's, you know, lived in, you know, Cobourg, Ontario, shout out to Cobourg.
Yep.
You know, sometimes you may not have met, you know, someone, you know, from the African Canadian community. So sometimes people feel uncomfortable talking about issues to do with race. Or,
Yeah.
But we as Ontarians have to get to a point where we're comfortable talking about the issues around reconciliation, about special needs, about race, about, you know, gender identity, because these things are happening around us, right?
Yeah.
So how do we make that environment more comfortable for people?
So what do you do to make the environment more comfortable for people?
You know, it's interesting because when people feel uncomfortable about race or special needs, I talk about the economics behind it. You know,
that sounds a lot like the OAC.
So, for example, you know, and you know, when we talk about the incarceration of black males, and I've used this example many times in the Jane and Finch area, we spend $78 million incarcerating and policing that neighborhood. When we talk about children with special needs, We talk about the disconnect between education, community programs. Here's a perfect example. Let's make an improvement to assessments. We set up the diagnostic hubs, and Lisa McLeod just put in a bit more money. That was one of the good things that they did, so we can get young people tested early. But we were finding that people being tested and then putting on a wait list, and then 6 months later they need to be retested again, and then it happened again, and it happened again. I've heard 4 or 5 times. That just does not make economic sense. Or when we're spending money in one program and there's no communication to the other program, it may be outside of the school, in the school. Imagine how much savings you have when you actually start to connect those programs and leverage the skill sets. Like, it's an economic argument, right? That parent, by the way, who I mentioned earlier, always said to me, there's enough money in the system. We just need to make sure it's going to the right place. And some of the numbers I've seen, and I'm talking about both under 18 and over 18, some of the numbers I've seen are just so high. And when you start to break away, where the money's going, again, it's like sometimes we built a system that benefits adults more than it does children.
It would be lovely to get you in to do a Facebook Live with you and Laura Kirby-McIntosh. Because Laura is our education expert, and she certainly taught me a lot about the funding formula, for example, and that you need a PhD in calculus to understand it.
It's so true.
And that essentially funding is not needs-based. And if we could just do that, we might change the world, Michael. We might.
It's so true. The amount of money we spend on supporting children, I do believe that there's a lot of money out there, and within other programs we've used something called a collective impact model, where you bring a community together with parents and with community organizations and bureaucrats and politicians, and you analyze those programs and their accomplishments. And whatever's not working, you look for ways to bring in new programming, and it has to be based on set goals. So politics has to evolve eventually, where the model doesn't become the model we currently have cannot continue, because it doesn't allow for those constant monitoring of organizations and services with input from community and output by bureaucrats. Like, there has to be a new hybrid model developed, because the model we have in government just does not work. And when we invited people into our ministry to co-design the new program, that's what we're trying to accomplish.
I want to ask you about, let's move on from being a trustee. Because I know most people watching this will fast forward at, where's the OAP? Why are you talking about the OAP? We at the Ontario Autism Coalition see these as parallel issues, right? So we have, prior to the announcement that flat rate funding is going to start, we were working on the exclusion issue at schools as a way of opening the door to saying, look, if principals feel they have to resort to this tiny little loophole in order to keep peace in the kingdom in their schools and exclude children with no due date and no plan for re-entry and nothing for that family and for that child, we've got a big problem, right? More than a big problem. And so we hope to open the door to many other discussions as a result of highlighting that issue. And now we are going to be experiencing families receiving flat rate funding, which means that thousands of kids are going to drop out of their therapy programs because they cannot sustain the expense, right? So we see these as parallel issues.
And a good therapist wouldn't even touch the dollars, because they know they couldn't accomplish what they need to do.
Yes,
right?
and that's exactly the discussion I had yesterday with a clinical team from under the umbrella tree in the West End of Toronto. If anyone wants to check it out, please do. So let's move on to your work as an MPP. I want to talk to you about lobbying and talking and communicating and all that good stuff, right? This, which we prefer to do. We would prefer to do this rather than come to your door with picket signs, but we're not afraid to, as you know, as you well know. When someone you're riding or anywhere has an issue, what's the best way to approach you, Michael?
So I always tell parents when they go into to meet with other politicians or education, education, people within public education. Um, I always say this, and it's so hard to do because I have children. I have two girls. To try to remove the emotion from the argument, it is such a hard thing to do. And I know it's easy for me to say this because I'm not in the same situation when I see parents when they come in to talk to me about very serious issues that affect their children.
Yeah, but you're a daddy.
Yeah, but I always say, like, let's stop and bring the rational argument in. Let's bring the main points, with some focus, and try to communicate that with that decision maker as effectively as possible. Because people, again, going back to our first point, sometimes just don't know. Like, I see all these MPPs saying, the Minister of Children and Youth Services, I'm proud of her giving, 23,000, getting rid of the wait list. Like, I don't think they know. Like, they don't know, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we need to get into them, and
Yeah.
we need to educate them on the
Yes.
issues. So
Yes.
yesterday I was on Twitter, and I saw someone saying some pretty mean things about Lisa McLeod.
Mm-hmm.
And, I privately messaged that person and said, I'm glad that you have enthusiasm, because they tagged me, and I said, glad that you have enthusiasm. Thank you for your advocacy. I said, but, the personal insults are not going to solve the problem for us right now.
Yeah.
So, and people are going to be asking Lisa McLeod to resign and this. What we should be asking her for is not to resign, is to sit down at a table with parents.
Yes.
That's what we need.
Yes.
Like, let's not be mean about it. Let's not be, let's not, bring our emotion to the table. Let's bring real science, real data, real logic into the debate. But she has to open the door,
Mm-hmm.
and she has to invite people to the table.
Yeah.
So, let's give her a chance. We made a mistake as liberals. We delivered a program that people didn't like with the cutoff of the age cutoff. People didn't like it. So what did we do? We went out there and we revamped the program.
Yeah.
And
our experience of where we are right now is 3 years ago when we started protesting you guys and giving you a hard time. The first set of meetings, pretty much across the board, everyone gave us the same response.
Right.
And we know that they had their fact sheet, right?
Yeah.
And they had to respond. And even though, and this was my experience with several MPPs, because I held the hands of many crying moms. I don't want to cry myself by recalling it, but it was tough. It was tough, Michael. And we had to bare our souls.
Yeah.
And you'd be sitting across from what clearly was a human being, a dad who loves his kids, who didn't go into this business wanting to hurt anybody, and yet they were unable to help us. They were unable to even discuss the issue because they could not leave their fact sheet. And it wasn't until the second visit, the third visit,
Agreed.
when those MPPs started going to the ministers and started saying, "Hey, I'm taking a beating out here, folks. Give us a bone, help us out."
Yeah.
And we want parents and people in the community to understand that is part of the process. It may feel futile.
Yeah.
Sitting across from yet another person smiling at you and not giving you anything.
Right.
Not giving
It's very frustrating.
It's very frustrating,
Yeah.
right? And so we want our new parents to know that this is part of the process, and none of us really enjoy it. It does mean we have to sell ourselves,
Right.
right? I don't really like going out there and telling strangers about my very difficult journey of parenting my child,
Yeah.
and I would if I could do this alone without the help of the team that I put together for my boy, I would, and it's another task, especially when the children are little and have such high needs. You have this much energy and this much patience, right? So we at the OAC, those of us who are a little farther down the road, we want to encourage the newer parents. Yes, protest. Yes, make your signs. Yes, be heard. But what we really want to do is sit down and talk.
Right. And that's-
can
and
I go
that's-
off my script a little bit? I want to tell you about something.
Of course.
So there's a lot of theater in politics,
Right.
right? We experienced that with you a little bit. You were very good at. I was right here in your office 3 years ago, crying with a bunch of moms, and you're trying to take it all in and not get punched in the nose. And I'm glad that nobody did, right? But I'm an adult, right? I try to be a grown up.
Right.
And when I'm subjected to silly bits of theater rather than sitting down and talking, so
Right.
I want to tell you about a meeting I had with Tim Porter
Right.
prior to this announcement. So the provincial
This is
government.
the chief of staff.
This is the chief of staff for Lisa McCall. Again, nice guy. I liked him.
Mhm.
I like the guy, you know. So we were invited to a meeting, only one. It's been reported that we had several. We had two. We've had one meeting, official meeting with the ministry, and that was with the chief of staff and two colleagues of his. And so we went there, Laura Kirby-McIntosh, myself, and two other board members, all moms with our cloth coats and Cheerios in our pockets, and one of us lactating, and we walk into this big boardroom, and there are these nice guys with great haircuts and great suits, right? And the room is decorated with children's art and toys. And we walk in and they go, huh?
They actually made
Huh?
reference to it.
Yeah, you know, like, hey, how about that, right? And that was a very interesting experience. Going in to the ministry to have a very serious conversation about life and death. I shouldn't use that life and death, but essential supports for our kids and other children and thousands of other children. And that told me a lot.
Right.
That told me a lot. When a minister, rather than meeting with us, and she never has, decides to bring a colleague up who is also a parent of a child on the spectrum and get her to make the announcement and then give her a big supportive hug, that's pretty insulting.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just another example of gaslighting, when really all we want to talk about is the service.
Right.
And practical ways of distributing the service.
And that's why I've said to people that I agree with you 100% that this.
You don't have to agree with me 100%.
No, I agree with you,
You
so much.
don't. Politicians love to agree, but
No, I do agree with you, and I'll
don't.
tell you why I agree with you. Because for so long, parents have just been, it's been like this back and forth game, right?
Yeah.
Running here, the program switches. I keep telling everyone, my colleagues at the legislature, some of the conservatives that I do know, the NDP, that, this issue, I saw, for example, the leader of the NDP recently saying, the Liberals did, like it was a recent tweet, the Liberals, left this program broken and now the Conservatives have made it worse. I'm like, let's just take a step back from the partisanship for 1 second. Let's remove we're talking about, a 5-year-old kid who needs help, for example.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Let's take one step back and let's remove the partisanship.
Yeah.
Let's remove the theater. Let's all work together. Let's pick one issue as MPPs that we can, stop the insults. Like I'm not going to insult Lisa McLeod, and so I'm not going to go after I'm just going to say I'm not going to ask her to resign. I'm just going to ask her to get rid of all of the partisanship and invite parents into that room and go beyond that. Show them what material you're working from. Show them where your challenges are.
Yeah.
She keeps saying that they've run out of money. Well, show us the information.
Show us the data.
Invite the parents to reconnect with the bureaucrats, because there were some bureaucrats in that office that were so good. They did. You've never seen a bureaucrat do a town hall before. Like, they were on the phone doing town halls with us.
Yeah.
We pulled that curtain, opened those doors, let people sit at the table, showed them where, really showed them where our challenges were, and we came up with practical solutions. I don't think parents are asking for, another, $10 billion to be added to this file. I think what they're asking for is for a logical way to bring in some reasons and make decisions that are just based on data and good judgment. That's all.
We're asking for needs-based supports.
Right.
We're asking for the clinicians to make the decision as to what kind of supports each child should get. Individualized plans. It's the only way to go.
And can I just add something? You know, when I was saying that, you know, try to remove emotion from the debate, like that's just a piece of advice I always give parents on any issue, right? Because we're talking about our children, it makes us emotional.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can't happen. You know, so that's why you have advocacy groups.
In my case, Michael, it's impossible. Right now, I am extremely emotional.
Right.
I'm not going to lash out at you. But
Right.
this is, you are talking about my baby here, right? And every part of me, everything in my life is about him.
Right.
You know, it's not possible for me not to be emotional. However, part of emotion is strength. So I'm bringing you my love, my strength, my tears. I'm bringing you everything that I am.
Right.
Because he's my baby.
Right.
You know, so let people be emotional. Even let people be angry. That doesn't mean, people in power that that is weakness or that we are incapable of reason.
I agree.
And again, I'll go back to my experience with Mr. Porter. A very clever man, a man who didn't divulge really anything, but spoke to us for a long time.
Right.
It was also very clear that he knew we were going to protest him. He mentioned that many, many times. Oh, no matter what we do, you're going to protest.
Right.
And we are sitting there as grown-ups, yes, emotional, yes, our tender underbellies are exposed, but here we are.
Right.
Here we are, you know. And what was my point? But he was gearing up for a fight.
Right.
And what was very interesting when you mentioned emotion, we were dry. Our eyes were dry. We were serious. We were there to talk.
Right.
Those three nice guys in their nice suits with their nice haircuts, they all looked like they were about to break down.
Wow.
They all looked like they're about to cry. So who's emotional here?
Right.
Is it the people? We have the luxury of being right.
Right.
That's how we feel. We have the luxury of being right. We can be the purists. We're all about the kids. My only boss is Charlie.
So you know, the question you asked me that was interesting is, what do parents do next, right?
Yeah.
And I think the number one piece is to go into CMPPs to have them understand, like you said, go back once, twice, three times. As a community, go and see your MPP and educate them on the issue. If that fails, then you know, there's you know, the protesting, there's the letter campaigns, there's the phone calls locally. You know, there's that coalition that builds locally, right? And then, as you know, if the resistance is still there from the local MPP and the government, it goes to, you know, even the local media. You know, there's so many things parents can do, and sometimes they don't know these things because they've never had to do it before, right?
Yeah.
But it's nice to have a organization like the coalition that, number one, can champion their causes from a provincial standpoint and provide them with guidance to go forward. You know, I'm meeting with some parents today. They're doing probably what I've just said that parents should be doing, to come in and talk to me about the issue, right? So I just encourage parents to get out there and book your appointment with your MPP, and regardless of what party they're from, and go talk to them about the issue. Yeah.
I want you to give us a little history lesson.
Yeah.
Okay. So in 2016, your government announced an age 5 cutoff from the IBI program. So children who are over the age of 5 or about to turn 5 were cut off from what was known as an IBI program, Intensive Behavioral Intervention Program. It caused quite a stir, that decision, and we gave you a pretty hard time. What's it like to have so many people protesting outside your office? What does that feel like?
I think protesting is a healthy thing. You know, if there are people who are protesting outside the office, I always invite them to join me for a meeting, you know, either then or, you know, at a later date if it's up to them. But I always see it as a thing that it's good for democracy, right? it allows people to feel like they're being part of a process. If they're not being heard, it gives them another way to actually, you know, give their message to the community as a whole. So for me, you know, I think it's a great thing. Now, I've only been protested at this office, I think, by once the teachers and once with the coalition, if memory serves me correct. So, you know, I've always looked for ways to build better relationships because of that.
Yeah.
So but you know, you know, we have a little parking lot outside, and you know, people are outside. You know, you know, the whole community notices, so it's an effective way to champion an issue.
And there's a Tim's right over there for the
That's
next
right.
set of protesters. There's a Tim's right over there. Can you remember what made you open the doors to the OAC and to clinicians to start talking about the new plan? I'm sort of cutting to. So we were successful, yeah? We made a point.
Well, there was a shuffle, right?
Yeah.
So I was asked to, you know,
A shuffle being?
So they moved one cabinet minister and put me into the role, right? So I was at, before that, tourism, culture, and sport. They removed me from that ministry and put me into children and youth services. And the premier asked me to find a solution. And the first thing I did was I called, I think it was right after I was sworn in, I called Bruce McIntosh. Never met him before, didn't know him, you know, besides what you'd see. And I said, I want to meet with you. And I called many other people who were involved in this issue and set up meetings. And I shared my phone number. I made myself available, and then I went right across the province to talk to parents. Yeah.
So as the minister, it's the big job next to the premier, right? But I'm wondering, in observing, I observed you quite closely when you had the job, and now I am observing the current minister. How much power did you have? I heard you both talk about negotiating with lots of different stakeholders, and I heard you mention the Treasury. I need to go to the Treasury and talk to them. You know, like, are there people behind the scenes that are more powerful than a minister, or that make it hard for you to create the programs that you're trying to create? What do you have to do to get the money and get it in the accounts and make it happen?
It's the premier.
It's the premier.
Yeah, the buck stops there. The premier has the ability to make those decisions. The Treasury Board is a part of that process because they will do the due diligence to ensure that the plan is right. It works. It's fiscally sound, but those decisions go into cabinet at the very end. And, you know, in cabinet, it's not like there's a vote.
Yeah.
It's a consensus process where the premier makes the final decision. Different premiers may use different you know, strategies, but I've seen Kathleen Wynne, you know, come in with one position, listen to her cabinet, and then change her mind. So it is the premier who makes those decisions.
So the premier is the emperor. They can say thumbs up, thumbs down on whatever plan a minister puts together.
Yeah, but there's you know, there's challenges in that, because if you lose the confidence of your cabinet, then you know, remember, the premier is chosen not by technically the people of Ontario. It's chosen by a party.
Yeah.
You know, people choose their local candidate, but the party itself chooses the leader.
Yeah.
And so if you lose the confidence of your caucus or your cabinet, you know, you can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, Kathleen Wynne was very good at, you know, trying to make adjustments to improve things. It's now up to Doug Ford. You know, Lisa MacLeod has to be the advocate. You know, she has to be in there advocating to Doug Ford. But her whole narrative at this point has been, there's no more money. You know, the government, the province is in debt. You know, they've inflated this debt by almost double, and it justifies the cuts that they're making in their minds, right? So, you know, yesterday, for some reason, the finance minister came out and says, oh, you know, it's $1 billion less now. We're going to see a lot of that. I guarantee you, he's going to come and say, through our hard decisions, so they inflate the budget, It's like me doing this. In my house, just say the grocery bill is $400 a month.
Yeah.
Me saying, wait a minute, my family's been, planned to spend $800 this year. Remember, the money hasn't been spent yet. It should be 400. You know what? I'm going to freeze all funding, which the Conservatives have done.
Mhm.
And now they're going to come back and say, we saved $400, even though that money wasn't spent. They're going to say that they saved it. So what he did yesterday with that $1 billion is part of this longer narrative of we need to make cuts because the previous government was irresponsible,
Mhm.
left us in a $15 billion debt, which is a projected debt,
Mhm.
number one, that's been inflated almost by double. What Lisa MacLeod needs to do in this situation as the minister responsible for children in this province is to be the advocate for these children. She needs to go to her colleagues and to the Treasury Board and to the Premier's office and convince them that they have to set a priority, because what is a budget? A budget's a reflection of priorities.
Let me ask you more about
Yeah.
numbers. So this is all part of the theater, right?
Right.
So politicians like to say we're going to spend $500 million or we're going to spend $300 million, and look what we've done. Look at all the great things that we've done for you, little people. Wow, we're amazing. Aren't we amazing? You're welcome. And this is what happens. The other thing that happens when the new guys come, they say those old guys, they didn't know what the heck they were doing. They screwed it all up. Those of us who have been following this particular issue very, very closely, we know we live waiting lists. We know all about waiting lists and how it works, okay? Tell me, please, explain to me why it seemed that the wait list grew overnight from a few thousand kids to 23,000 kids. How did that happen?
Well, you have to, that 23,000 number is, you have to look at that number from a few different perspectives. Well, number one, there was a massive increase in need, right? So we saw this transition in the last 15 years.
So we had a lot more kids
Yeah.
with needs. Okay.
The other piece is that sometimes a young person was getting services, but and has gotten ADA training, but has been brought back into the wait list for the next allocation of time.
So
They're in transition.
They aged out, or they were
Finished
their program.
Right, so they're back on that list according to, but that 23,000 number is not necessary. And then the other piece that's interesting is that
Tell us more about like all
the reasons.
The reasons, because
areas where
we have tried to communicate this to the public, that you had a lot of lists
right
prior to the new Ontario Autism program, right? So there were buckets of kids. That's not the right way to put it, but there were chunks. There were
right.
Little piles all over the place. So
there are certain parts of Ontario where even if you put in an extra if you doubled the budget in that area, the number,
bring
the list.
Back to the list though, like.
No, that's what I'm talking about. So there are parts of Ontario, even if you doubled the amount of funding, the list wouldn't move because the capacity was limited. So it was a capacity issue.
Okay, so not enough capacity means
not enough therapists to deliver services.
Right. So not enough centers, not enough therapists.
Right. So the assessment. So if you don't have the ability to assess quickly, then that person's not going to get into that program.
Right.
So the assessment and diagnostic had to increase.
Right.
So there's all these different issues that are contributing to it, right?
And then children that were not given service to begin with, right? So we had a whole other, it's not just the kids coming back, because I think a parent listening to that would be like, well, wait a minute, they had their turn, those people who are new, and I don't know how familiar you are, but there are some centers who would release children very prematurely,
right?
Because the wait list is so daunting, and
Right.
there's an awful lot of pressure on the larger regional providers to get kids in as quickly as possible.
Right.
So this is my experience out in the community as just the mom from Scarborough, right? So, but you got kids coming back into service who were released prematurely, and the clinician said, "Nuh-uh, this kid needs help. Get them back in therapy stat," right? We've got kids who were older, who never received service of any kind, or received the smaller ABA, what was known as the ABA program, which was not needs-based and not sufficient for them, right? Who are coming back to be reassessed by a clinician to determine the level of service, right? And then we have kids who were denied altogether because they were too low functioning, too high functioning. I'm using those in quotes because we don't really, a lot of us don't like that terminology, right? Then we have kids who had dual diagnoses. So if you were blind and you were autistic, no go. If you had Down syndrome and autistic, no, you can't enter the program. We don't know why, since ABA is a proven scientific therapeutic process for anyone,
Right.
you know, regardless of their challenges.
Agreed.
Even for you and I, you
Right.
know.
I need to change some habits.
You described the ABA process when you were talking about how government should be run very effectively. You know,
Right.
we all use ABA all the time. Okay,
So can I
this-
add to that
this
23,000?
and again, like, you know, I'll come out of the closet. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. You know, but I am a person. I am a human being, and the truth
Right.
is the truth.
Right.
You know, like those children have always been waiting for service. That's not new.
So with the
Yeah.
autism program that we created, you know, we looked at ways to increase the diagnostic hubs. So the creation of the 5 new hubs, and we wanted to really get the assessments done as quickly as possible. The other thing is, like, we removed any age restrictions. So, you know, if you needed services up until 18, you enter the program, and once you're in the program, you're in the program. There was no discharge and back and forth, which just does not make sense. There was one single point of entry, you know. So we tried to make it have a better flow, and the numbers were actually going down.
Yeah.
There was a drastic increase in the amount of numbers on the wait list, and my theory was you're going to get to a point where the wait list was going to be reduced in an effective, real way, that the actual cost for autism services in Ontario would actually decrease as well, because you wouldn't have that much demand in the system. There's a big difference between what is the backlog, the wait list, and what is the natural demand.
Yeah.
And if you can get to the point where you're at the natural demand for autism, those numbers, the cost is going to drop and the system's going to run smoother. But we need to get to that point, because if you can only access $7,000 a year for a child who needs intense ABA therapy, you're not going to, and you can't afford to put in the other 60, 70, 80, 90, $100,000 yourself. You're telling me you're not creating a wait list? You're creating a super wait list.
Yeah. Well, and the conversation I had yesterday with 3 clinicians was that potentially it could cause tremendous harm.
Tremendous.
That a little therapy can be dangerous, and it's a very dangerous thing to do for in some cases. How we do it for time? Because I have some questions from parents.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you okay?
And it looks like there's some
I
comments
know
up
there's
here
comments.
too.
Is that the computer is so far away, everyone. I'm so sorry.
Let me ask Andrew.
Maybe a staffer would be
Yeah,
willing.
maybe Andrew
Hey,
can help
Andrew.
us.
Andrew, maybe he would be willing to come in and read questions. I have some pre-submitted questions.
Let's see.
And that's just how
Andrew?
slick we are.
Can we borrow you for a little bit?
Andrew, your public
Please.
awaits.
Can you see the questions on Facebook when you log in? Yeah, from parents. Will you come and join us? Like, maybe sit on the couch over there and just read some questions?
Sorry,
Okay.
everybody. Sorry.
Andrew, who works in my office, is going to come and help us.
Yeah.
So we'll get some parents, some questions
Okay.
from the comments.
All right, so let me read some of these pre-submitted ones while we get Andrew to settle in. Lisa asks, in Michael Coteau's professional opinion, is it likely that the Ford government will change their minds? What's the best way to get them to change their minds about their autism program?
So I think that my prediction, so this is not, this is just a prediction. I predict that they're going to have to change what they've done. There is absolutely no way for the next 3 years that they're going to stick to this plan that just ill-conceived and doesn't work. And if they do double down and stick to this plan, well, I think they've underestimated parents with autistic children. They don't know that they're resilient, that they will not stop, and they have an incredible network right across this province. I've seen it personally. I've been on the end of that passion, right? So Doug Ford will have to change this. My prediction is that the minister, if she does not budge in the next couple of months, the next 2 months, there will be a shuffle. She'll be replaced, and a new person will come in with a plan that's right.
So keep up the fight.
Keep up the fight.
Keep up the fight.
Yeah.
Sylvia asks, in general, what do you think should be our long-term goal as parent advocates? How do we get more funding for the cause? I know it's a very broad question, but I always find myself wondering what the best long-term solution is.
I think before we start asking for, more funding, we need to say, well, the money that currently exists, is it being spent well? And the only way we can get to the bottom of that is, again, to open up the door, create an advisory committee, do these town halls, show the numbers, work with experts, and build a system that allows itself for constant improvement. If we can get to that point, and we get to a point where we realize that there are more resources necessary, then we start adding resources. But we need to fix the system, and it's got to be the connection between education, and it's got to be the connection between outside services. There needs to be this holistic approach. I've even argued that municipal governments, they don't offer programming, after school programming in many cases to children. They don't accommodate children with autism.
Yeah.
Like, we need to talk about, services, camps. We need to talk about nutrition. We need to talk about how, the effects on parents. Like, all of this stuff needs to be brought together, and we need to come up with a long-term solution.
Sylvia asks, in general, Janet asks, what are his ideas for reducing the wait list? We sort of talked about that, while still allowing the intensity of service that every child needs. So is it an answer to get rid of the kids? Don't go, Andrew. Is it, don't go, Andrew. Do you get rid of forgive me, but the previous decision in making an age 5 cutoff was, well, we'll just get rid of these kids, and we've opened it up for the little ones, and we can get rid of our waiting list.
It's so yeah.
And this is what we're looking at again.
The Conservatives fought against the age cap.
Yes, they did.
When we put it in,
thank you very much.
They stood up in the legislature, and they fought so hard, and I just don't understand why they put in place those age restrictions again. It just does not make sense. It doesn't make sense to me that a person who's 7 years old that needs services only qualifies for $55,000 over the course of their lifetime. That's not going to do anything for that young person.
So what were you in the process of doing that didn't get finished before you lost the job?
The regulation of the sector, so looking for ways to regulate. The increasing of diagnostic hubs, which McLeod has done, which is great.
Thank you.
We looked for ways to, the other piece was to look, one of the pieces that we knew that was missing is how the money was flowing. So rather than going to the regionals and then to the parent for direct funding, that choice we thought had to be done. We were exploring how it could be done in an independent way, where you would go to an independent body, you make the decision of either direct service or direct funding. And remember, it was my decision to create the direct funding model, which technically did not exist the way it exists today. But you could go into an independent body, receive either the direct service or direct funding, and then make your choice. People were always complaining to me, they go into a regional provider, and they felt like, if they were given options like, take direct service, you can have it today. If you want direct funding, wait 4 months. What are you going to do for your kid, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that independence in the system was something else we were looking for.
And that is another really good example of manipulating parents into making a decision that may not be in the best interest of their child.
Right.
And that is a very large part of navigating the system that's hard to get used to, and also what makes us so upset. Okay, so Myra asked also about regulation. You touched on it a little bit. Regulation of ABA has been asked. We've been asking for that for years. That was something you were looking at. How far along were you in that process?
We started off where the Ministry of Health actually moved forward on changing a regulation to because it had to come through the Ministry of Health. Eric Hoskins moved forward on that. So we were in the process of actually making that happen.
Yeah. Andrew, do you see a question that you like?
I'm just looking through here.
Just wave at me anytime, because I can keep going.
Okay.
So Tia asks, Well, one thing that's been bothering me is I thought that the funding for the program was $500 million, and now the PCs say it's $320 million. Why is there why is it different? Did the PCs cut funding when elected to create a crisis? Am I wrong?
So the funding, I believe, and I think I have to be very careful because it's been a little while since, I've been put forward with numbers and things like that. But the funding for autism services in Ontario was roughly, I believe, $180 million a year. We added $500 million when I made the announcement for the direct funding, which brought it over a 4-year period. It was around $1.3 billion. So we were spending, I believe, $330 million per year, roughly, on autism services. The minister has said that the money's run out, which is very hard to understand, because she said that she has also allocated an extra $100 million. So according to her, she has spent $430 million this year, which is challenging because there were many service providers that were saying the money wasn't flowing. Many people saying that they weren't getting it. Like, it seemed like something stopped.
Yeah.
My theory is that when Doug Ford came into power, he stopped anything that was a transfer. He put a halt to it. So
What does that mean?
when he came in, you remember all of the the rape crisis centers, the Black Youth Action Plan,
Okay.
all these different programs that were newer programs that didn't formally have agreements. He could put a stop. He said, stop all the spending right now.
Okay.
And then they went to the Treasury Board and you got things approved. My theory is that there was some spending at the first 3 months, from March or April 1st, when the fiscal year starts, to when they, took power July 1st, they were spending. Everything stopped. And then the minister went back and got $100 million to keep the money flowing. So the interesting thing will be is at the end of this fiscal cycle, when the estimates come forward, we'll get an understanding. The estimates are the accounting documents of a specific ministry. We'll be able to see exactly how much is spent. I've heard from some parents that they believe that they've been shortchanged. So the actual money that was allocated, if she says that there's $100 million more, plus the $330 million that existed,
Yeah.
she should have spent $430 million. I don't believe
Now,
that.
the OAC has no data on this, right?
Right.
So we don't know. I can tell you that when we sat down with Tim Porter, myself, Laura Kirby-McIntosh, and the amazing Chrissy and the amazing Sarah, our board members, he had said to us that the AK-10K had just blown the budget. And as of the fiscal year, March 31st, they were totally out of money. And it's because of you guys,
Right.
because of that wild and crazy spending,
Right.
that you gave to families, which was known as AK-10K. For some people who are new, this is all going to sound like gobbledygook, right? Because this stuff is complicated, right?
Right.
Does that ring a bell for you?
A lot of people, I think there was not a large percentage, but a surprising percentage of people who qualified, families that qualified for the AK-10K, I think it was 2,000 families, that didn't even use it. So first of all, they didn't use that money.
Yes.
The other thing is, why would they?
My provider explained that to me. She said that she has a ton of clients with a ton of money in their accounts that has not been clawed back yet.
Right.
And we're wondering, because we don't know. We don't know where they're getting their statistics and how they've figured this out. Do they know about all the money that's out there that needs to be clawed back?
I don't know if they know or not, but
Yeah.
If Mr. Porter is saying that we've gone on a wild spending spree to support children with autism, that just doesn't make sense to me, because we should be spending money on children and families to support them. That's being allocated. Ministry can't go and spend more money than it has. So the big question is, and we'll only find this in time, maybe people will, put a freedom of information to figure out exactly what has been spent so far. But like I said, my assumption would be at the end of the day that we have not spent as much money as we claim to have spent. and we'll be able to see that in the long term. Remember, they also said that they were going to they said that they were going to increase the budget by 100 million, right? Remember that was
They
their
said-
commitment
And,
during the
and
election.
Tim Porter said that money's spent.
Okay, so are they saying that if it's 100, if they increase the budget per year by 100 million, does that mean that now autism funding in the province of Ontario has gone from, over 4 years at about $700 million to now 1.7 billion? These are the big questions we need to ask, because we raised it by $500 million. If they've added another 100 million per year, like we just want answers to these questions.
We
How
just
much
want
money
answers.
is there?
We
That's
just want
all.
answers. Now, Andrew has seen some. I'm sorry, I cannot see the screen from where I'm sitting. Andrew, Michael's staff colleague, is going to read some questions.
So one here from Kristen is, what's the best way to prepare for a meeting with our MPP? What should I bring?
Well, we
Did you
touched
talk
on
about
that a little bit.
Right.
Maybe just quickly. Maybe she came in later. The
I-
best way to meet with you?
I think number one is to make sure people understand your personal story. It's the most important thing, and how you've been personally affected by this. And the second piece is, it's really important, I think, especially to conservatives, to talk about the economic piece behind it. If a young person does not get the skill sets that they need at a young age, it ends up costing us more in the long run. And it's a simple fact. I've met with parents who, their child has gone through ABA, the child's been able to read, has become verbal, because of it. Think about just those two components alone, and the independence we create in a young person who gets the right type of, investment at an early age. It ends up costing us less as a society long term.
Cut
And
him off, Andrew.
yeah.
Cut him off. What's the next question, Andrew?
So Diana asks, will funding be open to all children with disorder, disability, as ABA can be used with many populations?
I can't answer that. That's up to the current government to answer.
Right. And in
Yeah.
case people didn't hear, so will funding be available to children with other special needs and other disabilities? And Michael, I'm sorry, Michael, you said, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good question for us to ask the government.
And it is something that the OAC is we're grateful to the parents who will remind us that we're not the only ones who need support and who need funding, and would prefer a direct funding model, but just anything, thank you very much. ABA is not just for kids on the autism spectrum. We all know that. Anything else, Andrew? Okay, so I have one last question. If you could go back in time from Stephen, before 2016 and the OAP, and change something about it, what would that be and why?
Can you repeat it one more time?
So if you could go
Please.
back in time before 2016 and the OAP, and change something about it. So maybe I could rephrase his question and go,
Like the plan we brought forward.
the plan, how about we do this? The
Yeah.
plan that you created,
What would I change?
what, do you have some criticisms of your own plan? I mean, we know that it was evolving, right?
Right.
So what would you have wanted to have gotten done before you got kicked
So
out of your
it
job?
wasn't necessarily part of my plan. It was the ability to connect the plan, so it was a stronger connection to education. I think that if you had to pick 2 or 3 big issues when it comes to autism and making services better, it's the connection between the services the Ministry of Children and Youth Services provided and education. Connecting those two is so essential for a long-term solution for parents and families. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Michael.
That was
I
great.
appreciate your time
I
very
appreciate
much.
it. And can I just let parents know that, or anyone watching, that we do put posts up at Twitter. If you need to communicate with me, obviously you can call our office, 416-494-6856.
Yeah.
If
Andrew's
you
a
have
very
question.
handsome guy. You'll want to meet him.
My Twitter handle is @Coteau. It's just @COTEAU. A lot of parents do communicate that way. If you have things to share, please send them over or tag us. It's at COTEAU. Thank you very much.
Do you want to come to our rally at Queen's Park?
When is
You
it on the
wanna come?
7th?
I'm not sure. I'll
Yeah.
look it up. You want to come?
I'll be around.
I'll bring coffee.
Yeah, I've been invited already.
Have you? Okay.
Yeah, so I said that I'd come and talk about how we all as politicians need to come together on this, and let's do it for our children. Think of that 5-year-old kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew,
Yeah.
our technician
Yeah.
technician supporter.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
really
time.
appreciate the time.
And thank you for sharing your story.
Ah,
Yeah.
that's what we do. That's what we do.
Yeah, I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Bye, guys. Thanks. The unceremonious ending. Okay, do I want to end the video? Yes, I do.